What's going on, everyone? This is Brett Darian here, and today I'm very excited to show you what's in this little white box. This is a RetroTINK 5X. Now, what is a RetroTINK 5X? Well, first, let me open it up and show it to you first of all. Now while I'm opening up, let me say that if you're watching this video, I assume that you have somewhat of an idea already of what a RetroTINK 5X is, and you know what the basic video terms are, like you know what composite is, you know what component is, you know what resolution means, and all that stuff. If you don't know what any of that means, this may not be the video for you, because I'm not going to go into detail about what all that stuff means. I'm going to leave that to the experts. I highly recommend watching My Life in Gaming. They did a full, in-depth review of this device, and they cover the ins and outs of how this thing works and what it does and all kinds of comparisons. So I highly recommend you checking them out if you're interested in knowing all the details about how this device works. For this video, all you need to know is that the RetroTINK 5X is a video scaler. And a video scaler, what a video scaler can do is it can take your older game consoles like your N64, your PlayStation 2, your Dreamcast, and pretty much every console before that, and the RetroTINK will accept those video signals and it'll upscale it to a higher resolution so that it can be played on your modern TV using HDMI. Because if you buy a new TV today, most likely it will not have a component input, it will definitely not have an S-video input, and it may not even have a composite input. In fact, if you buy a really high-end TV, it's probably just going to have HDMI. So you need HDMI in order to play anything on your modern TVs. And that's what the RetroTINK will do. Now, there are other devices that will also do this. There are other scalers and other video converters out there that will convert component or composite or whatever to HDMI and whatever else you want to. But they all vary in quality. The most highly regarded video scalers are things like the OSSC and the FrameMeister. The FrameMeister is like the supposedly highly regarded as like the best video scaler available. However, it's very expensive. I think it's like more than $400. This is $300. Still a lot of money, but it's not quite as expensive as a FrameMeister, and some may argue it's just as good, if not better, than a FrameMeister. So this video will just be about what the RetroTINK will do for me, basically, how it performs for my setup. And wow, look at this. This is very nicely wrapped in a nice little pouch here. That's very nice. And of course, you get a USB cable as well. And as well as the remote. This does have a remote. It kind of reminds me of a Roku remote, actually, with the color scheme going on. But yeah, so that's the remote. You know, very nice that it has remote with it. It looks like it takes 2 AAA batteries. So let's look at the RetroTINK itself. We first of all take it out of its wrapping, and yeah, this is actually a little bigger than I thought it was. This is actually a very solidly built device. Now there were many other editions of the RetroTINK. The original RetroTINK was just simply a line doubler that just took 240 resolution and then line doubled it to 480. And then there were later versions of the RetroTINK that would support higher resolution and also support more inputs. This is the top of the line RetroTINK. This is basically the FrameMeister of RetroTINKs. This has well, first, let's look at the inputs on the back. We have a component input as well as a composite input, which is shared with the green jack of the component input. And it also has an S-video input, and you even have a SCART input on this side, which I would not be using right now, but I could have used that a number of years ago when I was trying to mess with SCART. But SCART is a If you don't know what SCART is an input interface that was only used in Europe and in some regards also Japan, though it was a bit different. We never got SCART here in the US. We only got component, we never got SCART. But SCART is a way that you can still use with your older game systems like the Genesis and the Super Nintendo that have RGB out. You can use SCART for that, and the RetroTINK 5X does support SCART. The only thing I think that this is missing is maybe a D-sub, or otherwise known as VGA input. Like the Dreamcast. I have a Dreamcast that has a VGA box, but this will not accept VGA. So that is one little downside, but I can see why they didn't put that in here. So this video is just going to be about how the RetroTINK 5X works for me. My first impressions of it, how it works for my setup. So what is my setup? Well, I have a PlayStation 2 that has the official first-party Sony component cables. I also have an RGB modded Nintendo 64 with Voltar's chip. So I also have the RetroVision cables for that, so it has the RGB signal going out through components, so I'll be able to use that with this. And I also have a component switcher box that allows me to instantly switch between component devices, and it also has two outputs as well, so I can use that to output to a TV as well as my capture device. And my Dreamcast, as I mentioned, does have a VGA box, but since the RetroTINK 5X does not accept VGA, then I will be using S-Video with it. So I'll be using the Dreamcast to test the RetroTINK's S-Video performance. So those are the three tests that I will be doing. So I'll be hooking it up, I'll be seeing how it works, and I'll be doing video comparisons of it all, so it should be really fun. So we have a lot to cover, so let's just get started. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to do when you get your RetroTINK 5X is to update the firmware. Mine shipped with firmware version 1.24, and the latest version is 1.77. So you're going to want to update that for the latest features. So if we scroll down here, this is on the official RetroTINK website. There are instructions on how to update the firmware. So first you gotta download and install these two files, and then you download the appropriate hex file from up above, the latest firmware update, and then after that you will then hook up your RetroTINK to your PC by holding down the menu button and plugging in the USB cable, just like that. And then when you do that, this should light up red, which means that it is ready to update. So then, what you will do there is you will start up the RetroTINK firmware tool, which is right here. Search for a device, and that is it right there. And then the hex file, I have it on my desktop, so that is this file right here. If you're on Windows, make sure you're not using the Mac file. Just use the file that's available right here. And then you will click here. It says do not power off device. And it is currently updating. So once it gets done with this, your firmware will be updated and you will have the latest firmware and the latest features. Okay, so that is how you update the firmware. So now, once I install the firmware, we're going to start testing the console. So let's see how this thing performs. Now before we get to the video test, I want to do a basic overview of the basic functions of the RetroTINK 5X. Now, when you first get the RetroTINK 5X, it tries to output at 1080p. Now, if you have an older TV like this one is here that only supports 720p, you might get a message like this when you first plug it in, and it says that it's not supported or that it's out of range. Well, that means that your TV does not support 1080p. But the device isn't broken. What you can do is just use the remote right here, and you press this button, and you keep pressing it a few different times. And you keep pressing it. And then eventually, it will get to an output resolution that your TV supports. As you can see here, 720p. This TV only supports 720p input through HDMI. Sometimes it does support 1080i, but in this case, it only supports 720p. So if you get that problem, just keep cycling through resolutions, and you'll eventually get a picture. Now you can see there is a menu up here in the top left corner. You can use the remote to navigate. There are also buttons on the device itself that you can bring up the menu and select your options, and also select between inputs. Now the home button here, the button that looks like a house, really just cycles through your inputs. So you got SCART RGB, you have composite, which is just the green input on the component, and you also have S-video input, and your SCART CV, and this is your component, or YPBPR. So those are your cycle between inputs, and like I showed you, this button here cycles between different output resolutions, and in the menu there are also various settings you can also select from. So you can press the right arrow key here to choose between H sampling and interpolation and scan line, different filters and vertical sync and deinterlace features. Now again, this is all stuff that other people have really covered really well. I'm not going to go into detail about what all that means. In fact, some of that stuff is kind of over my head as well. But you can see this is the latest firmware as of this video, 1.77, and there's a nice RetroTINK 5X logo there. And you can also turn it off if you want to, and that also clears the display. Now you can also press this back button right here to also clear the display at any time. So I think that pretty much covers the setup. So now let's start playing some games, and let's see how this RetroTINK 5X performs. Alright, so let's start with the PlayStation 2. Now, something to note about the PlayStation 2 is that a lot of PS2 games do not support progressive scan, so they won't run in 480p, they will only run in 480i. And this is one of those games. This is Space Race, or Looney Tunes Space Race is basically what it is. And this game will only run in 480i. So this will give us a fairly good idea of how the RetroTINK will handle most PS2 games, because most PS2 games only run in 480i. Now, this footage here that you're watching is direct capture from PS2 hardware using the first-party Sony component cables. So this is direct capture from PS2 hardware to my capture card using component cables, no RetroTINK or anything. There's no upscaling going on. This is just direct capture footage. And honestly, this doesn't look too bad. I mean, most people would tell you that the PS2 has kind of a weak component output, but this footage is actually making it look pretty nice. I actually like how this looks. So no real complaints here. But I am interested to see what the RetroTINK will do. So we will now switch over to that, and this is what you get. So I'm going through the menu here. This is being upscaled to 1080p. And I'm also changing through different interpolation settings here, from sharp to soft to smooth. There's very little difference there, really. I'm also trying scan lines here. Now, I am not a fan of scan lines, but some people are. So if you are a fan of scan lines, these are the various scan line options that the RetroTINK 5X offers. So I will let you be the judge of that. Now there's also vertical sync settings and deinterlace settings, weave, blend, bob, and linear bob, and motion adaptive. I usually leave it on motion adaptive. That seems to look the best to my taste. But you can full all these settings yourself and see which ones you like. This is the color space. Usually full looks the best to me. And video LPF is a video low pass filter. I know that's useful on the N64. I'm not sure about other consoles. And I'm also going to switch between different resolutions here. Now I am noticing that comparing this to the component footage, this footage does look darker. I'm not sure why. I'm using the same capture device, so I'm trying to be as fair as possible. But for some reason, this captured footage here does look a lot darker. And the screen's black there now because I switched to a resolution that my capture card did not support. So apparently my capture card does not support 480p through HDMI. But we'll switch back to 1080p here in just a second, and we'll get picture again. So honestly, this footage, this is a little disappointing. I was expecting it to look better. But I will say that the RetroTINK does look pretty good on my TV, so the capture card might just not be doing it justice. So now we're going to move on to the Nintendo 64. Now, the Nintendo 64 RGB signal is kind of hard to capture because it's only 240p, and none of my capture devices support 240p. So I had to use my GBS 8200 capture device, which technically does scale it to 480. And that is what you are seeing here. Now, the GBS 8200 also has different settings you can use to adjust the picture and contrast and brightness. And I do have some of those settings changed. Now, if you believe that this makes this comparison unfair, well then, this is what it looks like without those settings adjusted. And you can see now it looks even darker and even less appealing than it did before. So I'm not really a fan of using the GBS 8200. Now, it does work, but it is inconvenient to use. The RetroTINK 5X is definitely a much better device than the GBS 8200. Now, some TVs do support 240p over component, but they will just see it as 480i, which can degrade the image, so still not the best option there. So now we're looking at the N64 RGB signal running through the RetroTINK 5X using the HD Retrovision component cables, and this looks much better. It's colorful, it's sharp, it looks great, so this will definitely be how I play N64 on my TV from now on. Now I'm continuing to go through the menu here and change some settings. There are some game console specific settings here in the H sampling menu. There is one for the N64's 320 resolution, and that'll display it more properly. And as you can see here, I think it looks really, really nice. And coming up here, I'm going to change this vertical sync setting. And my capture card did not like it. The other setting there besides triple buffer is the frame lock, and it did not like that setting for some reason. Now, I've paused it here because I want to show you guys something. This is the RetroTINK 5X. This is the GBS 8200. Looks kind of crummy, right? Now let's go back to the RetroTINK 5X. And it looks a lot better, right? Well, here's something that surprised me. This is S-Video. Now, I know I said I was going to use the Dreamcast to show S-Video, but for some reason, I could not get my Dreamcast S-Video cables to work. Apparently, they don't work anymore. I'm not sure why. There might be a problem with my Dreamcast AV out port, because I've also been having trouble with that VGA box that I have. So, I'm not sure what's going on there. However, this does look surprisingly good. Now, I was using a different capture device to capture this footage because my main capture card does not support S-Video. But this here is what S-Video looks like through the RetroTINK. And it still looks really good. And this is making it look like S-Video actually has the deepest colors, the best saturation. Some may argue this even looks the best out of all the footage. However, I'm not here to say that the S-Video is superior to RGB. My point here is that when you see these video comparisons, these video clips, and all these YouTube videos, take them with a grain of salt, because when you're capturing video like this, there's many variables at work, from the particular cables you're using, to the particular capture device the person's using, to various settings you can adjust. Now, for these captures, I was using all the same settings across the board, but between that and even the settings of your own particular display that you're using right now, that can really skew the results of these capture comparisons. But that being said, though, I actually am really happy with RetroTINK 5X. I think it's a really good device, and it's definitely going to be what I use from now on to play my retro video games. But anyhow, guys, I thank you so much for watching. Feel free to leave a comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.